So, welcome to another episode of Five Star Conversations, where we deep dive with the leaders in the hospitality industry. And today I have the pleasure of talking with Dean Minett. Welcome, Dean.
Hi, Brendon.
Dean, what I'll do is I'll kick off with your bio just so that those listening have a background on you, and then we'll get into the questions.
Terrific.
So, Dean Minett is a seasoned hospitality professional with over 4 decades of experience in hotel management, consultancy, and asset management. As a managing director of Gatehouse Hospitality, he has focused on delivering best-in-class hospitality services and bespoke business development advice for hotel developers and investors across Asia Pacific, the Middle East, and Europe. His corporate career includes roles as country general manager for Ascott Limited, where he successfully launched and repositioned brands, improved profitability, and managed multi-million-dollar service residences. Dean's expertise span operational transformation, asset realization, and the development of strategies for market entry and growth, making him a key figure in driving innovation and operational excellence in the industry. Throughout his career, Dean has been deeply involved in industry education, thought leadership, and governance as well. He's served on various boards and committees, including the William Angliss Institute and Parks Victoria, and has contributed extensively to hospitality literature as a columnist and co-author of industry texts. Recognised as a tourism legend by Tourism Training Australia, his accolades include judging national and state tourism awards and mentoring future leaders. Dean's passion for the sector is complemented by his academic background, including a Masters of Business in Research and credentials from the Australian Institute of Company Directors. This ensures his influence extends from operational to strategic realms within hospitality. So welcome again, Dean. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thanks very much, Brendon. I'm sorry that took so long to read. The trouble with being around for too long.
And that's the short version, I must say. There's stuff that we missed out, which we will include in the show notes, so you can
Okay.
about the books that you've co-authored and things like that, which I didn't know. So that I've learned something, which is great.
Terrific.
Dean, the first question I always like to ask is, did hospitality find you or did you find it?
When I was in high school, I had two options. One, my best mate and I were both thinking about becoming pilots. He ended up doing slightly better than me academically, and he ended up going and doing that. Whereas I actually sort of fell into hospitality because I could always really enjoyed cooking, funnily enough. I always had a view that I was going to run my own restaurant. Didn't happen. I happened to find a job as a receptionist at the Southern Cross Hotel in Melbourne at the time, 426 rooms, massive ballroom, etc. And I just really didn't falter from there. It was a case of fell in love with the hotel industry, worked my way through it, and obviously worked my way up to senior roles.
Love it. The Southern Cross was an icon in the day, wasn't it? It was premier hotel in Melbourne. Everything happened at the Southern Cross.
Well, it was known for the Brownlows. It had the Logies. It had any visiting stars would come there. It was owned by Pan Am. It had been an intercontinental hotel. And 6 months before I joined it, they changed hands and it just became a standalone hotel, but still enjoyed the same reputation and still attracted the who's who of industry, the who's who of the entertainment industry, the corporate titans. All of those people were all drawn to there.
Yeah, yeah. And from the Southern Cross then, sort of how did your career progress?
So I started off as a receptionist, and I was very fortunate the owners of the hotel were developing a hotel in Sydney, the Southern Cross Sydney, which is now the Vibe on the corner of Goulburn and Elizabeth.
Yes.
And at the time they said to me, "Oh, we'd like you to be involved in the new hotel." And I was about 20 at the time. And I thought, "Oh, yes, they want me to be a front office manager or something like that." And they said, "Oh, no, we want you to be assistant general manager." And I sort of, "Oh, okay, fine." And what they said was, "But we want you to work your way all through the hotel and learn everything before you go up there." So that's what I did. I spent a program of actually working in absolutely every department. Every time I felt comfortable, I'd move on to another department. And then about 6 months before I was due to move up there permanently, I had a meeting in Sydney with one of the solicitors who said, "Oh, something or other about being the general manager." And I said, "No, no, no, somebody else. One of the other directors is general manager." And he said, "No, no, you are. It says so here." So at the tender age of 22, I signed the paperwork to say I was going to be general manager and licensee of the hotel, and then turned 23 just before we opened. So it was an interesting experience, I must say.
Wow. Yeah, that's young. That's
Yeah.
really young. Because 190 something rooms, isn't it? Just under 200 or even
Yeah,
more.
it's around that now. They did add some more rooms on later
Yeah.
on. That's part of the reason when I grew a beard, actually, because I wanted to look older. I didn't want people to know how old I was when I was interviewing them. And funnily enough, one of the first people I interviewed was 59. He was a gentleman, food and beverage background. I employed as food and beverage manager, 59, and he had 3 kids under the age of 7. And when I asked him why he still wanted to work, he said, because I need to set an example for my kids. And so he came on board and did a great job.
I love it. And then from the Southern Cross.
So from Southern Cross, I then went across to Interwest. Interwest was at the time a famous Australian hotel group, the largest Australian hotel group. They had properties like in Melbourne, the Chateau Melbourne. They had the Chateau Sydney. They had properties all up and down. They launched the Eden Hotel Group.
Mm.
So we had Eden on the Park, Eden on Yarra. There was Eden Coral Coast, Eden Twin Waters. I was at Chateau Melbourne for a little while, for a year, and then I moved to Eden on the Yarra as hotel manager. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the day that the hotel opened was the day that Interwest went into receivership. You know, it was the late 80s, a lot of financial difficulties around, and unfortunately, that meant that the career truncated a little.
Yeah, I remember that. I literally just started with Horwath as a consultant doing feasibility studies, and I ended up doing some work with Vasu Sagafu
Right. Yeah.
in liquidations. I remember spending a night at Eden on the Park and sort of documenting everything that had a logo on it that would need to be changed if we're able to sell that property.
It was a great shame because I think the owners, the directors of the company had great vision, and I think that the whole Eden concept, the whole company concept was great. Just unfortunate, obviously, money was very expensive at the time, and they got caught. But there were some very really clever people there. People even like Roger Gorman, who I don't know if you remember that name from many years ago, pretty well hotelier as well. David Gibson, who ended up being one of the top. He was head of JLL hotels at one time as well. A lot of really good people sort of came through the company, and it was just a shame it ended up as it did.
Yes, I remember David Gibson. I remember meeting with him a couple of times when I was at Horwath, actually. It is a shame because they were amazing properties too. I mean, Eden on the Yarra is now the Crown Plaza, isn't it?
Correct.
Yeah.
So
Um,
all really well positioned, as I said. But anyway, I mean, that's the nature of the business that things
it
happen.
is. It is. And from then to Ascot, or was there
No, no, I had a few other things in between as well. I worked it for a little while with, I'm just trying to think from there, it was then going to work with the All Seasons group, the Australian All Seasons group. Then spent a bit of time also with Bass Hotels and Resorts, which was obviously is now IHG. Then I went to work for a Malaysian group called Kemayan, who had the franchise for the Park Plaza and Park Inn brands. And I went
right?
up to Brisbane and ran a property up there for them. And it was, I'm just trying to think, and then I'd actually gone back to working for myself before I joined Ascot, and I had somebody approach me out of the blue about a role with them, and it was as an area GM in Victoria, and they had a number of new hotels they were going to open up because they had bought. It was interesting because Ascot had bought the Oakford group of apartments
Right.
in Australia, and that was their entree. Funnily enough, I'd actually approached them some months beforehand to see if they needed any advice, and I was told no, they didn't need any consultants. But then I actually joined them later on, and during that time, we also opened up quite a number of Somerset properties. There was Somerset Gordon Place, there was Somerset St Kilda Road, there was Somerset on Elizabeth. But we had Somerset properties, there was an Ascot in Auckland, and then we had all the Oakford properties as well. So from there, I joined them in 2003 and then progressively worked my way through to the point where in 2007 I was appointed as the country head for Ascot, and that's what I was until I left in 2012 to start up again to go back to my own business.
Love it. There's some familiar names there. It was Robert Palmer was.
He'd started off Oakford, yes,
Yeah, yeah. I
not to
remember.
be not to be confused with the singer.
Well, I used to get confused because when I was at Horwath, my boss would say, I've just met with Robert Palmer, and that song Irresistible or whatever it was
Yes.
like top of the charts. And I said, him. And she's like, no, the guys that started Oakford. Oh, okay, fair enough.
Well,
But, I was
again,
young.
another influential, one of those influential developers. I mean, you look at Robert Palmer, you look at John Avram, who'd had Interwest, and then there was the other guy who had Greetings hotels as well at one time, sort of all around that time. And even when you have a look now at the Stamford in Melbourne on Little Collins Street, that was originally an Oakford hotel
Right.
that
Okay.
opened up. So, yeah, so they were around everywhere. And then in the end, we ended up selling off quite a few of the Oakfords to Quest.
Yeah.
which is ironic given that obviously then Ascot ended up buying Quest some years later.
It is interesting, isn't it? It is interesting. Dean, is there a story from the early part of your career, and it can be humorous, it doesn't have to be, or it could be serious, that sort of cemented your love for the industry?
Look, one of the, as you know, working in hotels, you get exposed to so many different things, so many different types of people.
Yeah.
And anybody that works in hotels will say, I could write a book on it. But there was one particular thing that stood out one time. I'd finished my duty manager shift and I was about to leave, and one of the other duty managers approached me and said, could you help me? There's a woman with a dog in the lobby and she won't leave. So I walked out and went to find poor old Brian, and he'd gone upstairs. So I went upstairs to find Brian cornered by this woman and her dog, and the dog's name was Horror, and she's going, bite him, Horror, bite him. And Brian was looking very concerned, and the dog looked quite friendly. So I said, I think this is all right. And I just leant down, picked up the dog, turned around to Brian and said, come on, let's go. So I walked down the stairs, put the dog outside, looked around to see where Brian was and find him coming down the stairs with his glasses half off. And the woman, he thought I'll do the same thing, and just escort her out, and she just went whack and hit him in the face. And poor old Brian didn't quite recover. And then she continued through the lobby, yelling abuse, screaming, and all the rest. And anyway, I got one of the other managers. We walked up behind her and just lifted her bodily up by both arms and just carried her through to the end near Palm Court and put her out the door and closed the door. But you continually deal with the very best of people and people who are at their most challenged as well.
100%. 100%. And was she a guest?
No,
Or, no.
no. No, she just wandered in off the street. Obviously, somebody that, with mental health issues
Right.
and or substance issues. And yeah, as I said, just unfortunate. But when you have a big hotel, you just attract people like that. It's like moths to a flame.
Yep. Yep.
I'd have to say all of those things were great formative experiences dealing with all of those people. And again, what you found was some of the best people to deal with were those people who might have been quite poor, but they'd saved up all their money to come and have a big stay in the city. And some of the worst people maybe are at the other end of the spectrum, but there are also some great people. Even like I remember meeting Robert Holmes at court, and he and his wife were just absolutely lovely people. So yeah, I think what it taught you was so much more about humanity and how to deal with people in general.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good point. Talking about that, Dean, is there someone that inspires you, or where do you get your inspiration from?
I think from a hotel perspective, when I first started off in the industry working for the family that owned the Southern Cross, I think one of the patriarch of the family was somebody that was a really shrewd, tough negotiator, and I think I learned a lot from observing him. One of his sons was a great people person in terms of walking through the lobby, shaking hands with guests, going into the restaurant, making sure you knew who was in there every day. One of the other directors that I dealt with in Sydney was terrific at. He was very pedantic, which I'm often accused of being, but I think it's for the best reasons, which is if you're looking at a menu, making sure it's spelt correctly. If you're looking at any piece of paraphernalia that is representing you, you have to make sure that it's spelt correctly, that it's phrased correctly, that it's communicating the right message. Because there's so many things you can just see people haven't taken the time to read or care about it. And so they're things that I thought were really important to learn. But I think the other thing from a business, in terms of doing business with people, I'd say my father, who was a chartered accountant, had his own business, and Dad had a reputation of being a great arbitrator. I think at times he was always very even-handed. People relied upon him to resolve issues, and Dad would always, he wouldn't jump to conclusions. He'd always say, well, let's think about this, let's look at both sides and then try and find a way forward. And I think from a business perspective, I'd say probably he was the one who influenced me the most in terms of how I might deal with issues or even staff or clients.
Yeah, I like that. So it's a balance. And as you said, you've watched, leaders as you rose through the industry and took the best of each of those.
Well, when I was a young general manager and I was in Sydney, two people that I looked up to there were Rudy Markle and Peter Gramotka, for instance. We all moved back to, I was in Sydney, they were in Sydney. We all moved to Melbourne at around about the same time.
Right.
They each had different strengths as well, that it was good just, here was me, young 22-year-old, looking at these guys going, what am I doing here? But, you sit in meetings, you learn, and they were all very generous with their time as well, which was great. There's probably too many people to think about that you read about, you observe in the hotel industry. You learn both what's good and what's bad. You learn about general managers that would drink too much or be inappropriate in their behaviour. So you learn very quickly what not to do. But you also learn, I said, there's certainly lots of people I've worked with that have been terrific and again have been very perceptive, very honest and very persistent.
On that note, what is probably the best piece of advice you've ever received in your career?
One of the ones that stands out the most is one of the owner of the Southern Cross, who I said to him one time many years later, something about, do you miss not having the hotel? And he said, no, you only fall over looking backwards.
Okay.
And I just thought it was a really interesting way in terms of looking at what's happened to you in the past and thinking rather than dwelling on it. I used to have, when I was growing up, there was a TV show called Kung Fu. I don't know if you remember it.
Yeah.
There was a particular part in there where the grasshopper was asking, his master something about he was worried too much about what had happened in the past. And his master basically said, and I won't try and replicate the accent or anything, but his answer was, well, to remember the past is to aid the present, but to dwell on the past is to rob the future. And I thought that again was a really good piece of advice.
Yeah.
So I know that they're not specifically hotel related, but I think they're general life things that you could apply at any point anyway.
Definitely. Definitely. Yes, I remember that. David Kane, I think, was the actor.
Yeah, David Carradine.
David Carradine. Yeah, that was, yeah, anybody of our era would remember that. That's quite
Yeah,
interesting.
showing our age.
Yes. Dean, I've got something here. So before we spoke today, I said if you could have anything printed on it, what would it be?
Yep.
Camera's focused in it now. And you said, when in doubt, be kind. So what's the story behind that? I know that we spoke and you said there's a lot of sayings, but when you thought hard about it, that was the one that really resonated.
Like I think one of the things I guess probably throughout my life, but even I guess in latter years, we all go through difficult times. We all, if we sit and think about it, we all have people close to us that have perhaps suffered through illness, cancer, obviously, it's, 1 in 2 people will have it by the time they reach 80 or whatever. And we had a couple of people close to us, family members or whatever. And the other thing is that I guess, and more obviously now, is the fact that there's a lot of people suffering from mental health challenges. And I don't mean people who are crazy, but I mean people who are suffering depression, anxiety, especially post-COVID. And the thing is, I guess, whenever I'm dealing with anybody in business or in life in general, you stop and think, okay, is this person, especially if they're being difficult, you've got to stop and think, are they being difficult because they're just an asshole? Or are they being difficult because actually there's something else there? So I always try and find that out and always try and find, I guess, a line in to find out really what's going on there. Now, if it's a straight business transaction, okay. If you're dealing with somebody who wants you to fix up a problem, they don't necessarily want you to be psychoanalyzing them. But when you're dealing with issues in general, it's always important to try and understand, I think, where the other person's coming from and what challenges they might be facing before you get too harsh. Again, I'm always for what's our solution? How do we move forward with something? And sometimes to do that, you've got to pause and take time to understand what's happening on the other side.
Yep. It sounds like that, obviously something you've learned from your father, as you said, a great adjudicator and always looking for where the truth potentially is and taking the time to stop and, as you said, pause. And yeah, I like that.
I think at the end of the day, I mean, it's easy to get angry. It's easy to get angry and be difficult. It's a lot harder not to do that. For me, getting angry is the final position. If I get angry, then that's it, sort of thing. But I always will try and find a way forward before that.
Yeah. And it's interesting into where we are today, because obviously so many businesses have signs up that you have to be polite to their team. It's a sad tiding, really, that we have to actually put that up. It should be human nature that you show respect to somebody.
Well, I think one great interview technique that I've seen used a lot is, you interview somebody in a social occasion, because what you want to observe is how well do they treat the serving staff.
Yes.
And if they're nasty to them or look down your nose on them, then that says something in particular about their behaviour and about their personality. And I think it's again about, well, how do you treat the least of you versus the most powerful. And again, it's not, at the end of the day, of course, we have clients. We have to look after our clients. It's something that we are pedantic about. We're always worried about it's our owners' money. How can we help them improve that? But as I said, when dealing with other people, it's something that you've always got to take into account, I guess, when dealing with stuff. Because, we look for that in our staff as well. Well, we've got 4 partners and 14 staff now. And what we look for is those types of qualities, because we want that to be replicated when they're dealing with clients and with others, whether it be a hotel operator or a hotel owner.
Yeah. Interesting point. I've noted and this is just me, maybe my observation, that hotels obviously look after their guests with kids' gloves, but don't show the same level of respect to their suppliers. I don't know if that it's probably always been the situation, but to me, it's become even more apparent of late, which I think is also disappointing because, it should be a level playing field. It should be respect across the board.
One of the big arguments over the years is, when we think about customer service, and I went through a great customer service program many years ago and have studied stuff like Jan Carlson's Moments of Truth and things like
Mm.
that. And what that involves is you understanding where your role is in the, I guess, in the service equation. And that could be the way that you're dealing with a guest at a front desk, could be the way that you're dealing with the client who's an owner. But all equally important is to think about not just think about those people, but think about all stakeholders. And when we say stakeholders, it's everybody who has a stake in that business, and that includes your suppliers. If I think back through the COVID period, for instance, one of the hotels we'll look after in interstate, talking with the general manager about how he coped with the linen shortages. And what he told me was that absolutely everybody was being incredibly difficult to this particular supplier. And he took his time to say, how are you going? Are you all right? Why don't you bring your wife in for a night and stay the night? Because it sounds like you're having a really hard time. Now, you sort of think, if you're going to deal with that person or the difficult person, who's the supplier going to look after? You don't do it just for that reason, because obviously it's a bit manipulative. But this general manager was genuinely concerned for them. But that's the flow and effect that you get from that. And I think, as you said, treating your suppliers well has to be an important part of the equation. And
Yeah.
being honest and transparent. I think, if times are tough and you can't pay, then you're up front and say, look, just so you know, we've got a bit of a cash flow issue, but we will pay on this date. And I think they're the things that often people don't, they just forget about the fact that they need those suppliers to be operating.
Yeah, that is, yeah, good point. Dean, I'd like to sort of move on to some questions about the industry itself. Is there a trend at the moment that you're certainly buoyed about or excited about or potentially nervous about?
I think the one that probably has been on my mind the most is AI. Obviously, there's lots of, AI is now in everything. It's on our phones. It's in, we've got Copilot in Microsoft. Everybody has a version of it. When ChatGPT first came out, of course, I, like everybody else, started, trying it out. And that to me, I mean, it has the capacity to be such an incredible positive tool, but also an incredibly divisive and negative tool as well. It has the ability to create really, really lazy people. But it also has the capacity, I guess, to grow our knowledge and to improve our level of service incredibly as well. So it's almost like, we're holding on the reins of this massive beast that we sort of think we know what's happening, but we really don't. And I guess in terms of the people that are developing it and continually managing it and mining it, there's just so much there that I think it's a concern in terms we don't know how big it will get, and we don't know really what the impact is going to be on our lives. I know that there are attempts, obviously, at different government levels to try and curb that,
Yeah.
but it's probably a little bit like, human cloning in a way, where obviously people said, well, we really don't want to do that because we're not sure how bad it's going to get or what it means. It's not quite the same, but I think where it has the same, I guess, what's what I'm looking for, like it has the same psychological implications, philosophical implications, moral implications, and it's something that we really, really need to tread carefully with. We, in discussions with our team about the use of AI, again, we say, by all means use it, it's a good tool, but you've still got to check. There are numerous instances where people use AI. They might write an article or something, but then you find that, in fact, the references used were out of date or used incorrectly or whatever. So there's never going to be any substitute for actually really physically checking things.
Great point. Yes, AI will make things up, definitely. Yes, I think you're right. Then something I was reading the other day, Sam Altman tried to stop something because he himself questioning, how far will it go? And I think to your point about there is the potential to make us extremely lazy, a little bit like, to be honest, we've become with GPSs. I think if
Yeah.
you ask anybody to go back and look at a Melways or a Gregory's or whatever they were used to, they wouldn't be able to do it. And navigating without Google Maps or something these days it's sort of a bit unheard of.
And I think part of that is driven by the fact we're always wanting to be better and faster. And you think about using GPS, I know how to get from my home to the city, but I
Yeah.
don't know what's going to be the fastest route, because
Yes.
I don't know what traffic is ahead of me. And I think that's probably the thing. If I think again, about my father would drive into the city the same route every day.
Yep.
Sometimes you'd be longer than others. Whereas now, if we can save 2 minutes by going down red riding somewhere, then you will. So
Yeah, you're 100% correct. So when I'm in Melbourne and my mother-in-law is in the car, she's like, "Oh, I know how to get there." And it's like, well, Google's telling me that we can save 3 minutes by going
That's
this way.
right. So I think it's interesting, technology is all about, and it has throughout time, I guess, been about improving efficiency,
Yeah,
about improving comfort, etc. And you've got to stop and say sometimes, is that extra 3 minutes worth that? Or am I better off to spend the time, focusing on the person next to me or even enjoying the journey?
100%. To be honest, that's one of my biggest concerns. Obviously, having teenage children, I suppose. No, my eldest is not a teenager anymore, but the inability to switch off, it scares me dramatically. Emptying the dishwasher, helping cook dinner, everything involves a device or a gadget, and sometimes multiple. Yeah, no, something I was reading yesterday on LinkedIn where the chap was, it was an article that somebody wrote, and they were negatively saying that they were watching a lady on a train journey. It was about 4 hours. She didn't have anything to watch. She didn't have anything to read. She didn't look at her mobile phone. She just sat there looking out the window. And this person was saying, how sad was that? And this person was commenting, that opportunity to
How
be with
wonderful was
herself
that?
and her thoughts, how wonderful is that? It's something that we've lost. And that is, I think that's an issue. A lot of the pressure we have these days is the inability to have any quiet time to ourselves.
But there are apps for that.
Well, there are there are, and I do use some of those actually as well. But generally, you've just I love people watching, and if you're catching public transport into the
Yeah.
city or something, it's 9 out of 10 people are on a device.
When I left Ascot, I decided to give myself a little break before I started up the company again. And
Yeah,
so I went and visited my nephew who's in Mongolia. So I spent a week in Mongolia with him and we traveled around quite a bit. And the thing was, outside of Ulaanbaatar, there's basic signal didn't work unless you had a sat phone. So therefore, for the first time for me in years, I had to go and say, well, if the car breaks down, there's no RACV or NRMA. I can't call the Royal Flying Doctor Service if we have an accident. And so all of a sudden, you do have to focus on something completely different. I had to put my trust in my nephew, who hopefully knew what he was doing. But it did change. And I think what it meant was actually it was quite freeing and enabling because it meant I didn't feel guilty that I wasn't connected. I didn't feel guilty that I'd missed somebody's message or an email or whatever. And you could actually look around and enjoy the beauty of whatever it was around you. So, I mean, obviously we're not Luddites. We don't want to get rid of technology altogether, but I think
oh,
it's just that danger again of saying, how do you balance it up? And again, studies show that yes, children's brains do change by constant use of the technology. So we just have to be really mindful of that.
yeah. On the subject of technology, what has been one of your biggest learnings from a hospitality technology point of view over the years?
Again, showing my age, when I was at the Southern Cross, we changed from the Whitney system to the Quantel system.
Oh, yes, yes.
So I was involved in actually converting the hotel from manual to computer. And what was promised was a whole lot of efficiencies. And they sort of came, but they came at risk and they came with the loss of other things. So previously, let's say you would have had your night auditor would be there writing down everything in a ledger book and adding everything up sort of thing. All of a sudden now you push the button and it's gone. What changed though as well was that all of a sudden, instead of when somebody walked up to the front desk, instead of you staring them at, and looking at them because that's what your role was, all of a sudden now you're looking at a screen.
Yeah,
And that's one of the big dangers with technology. It becomes a barrier to you and the guest. The other thing was, I think it certainly improved record keeping, but as I said, but I think what it also meant then was for the staff member, they lost the ability to learn new skills as well. I think even it might be a simple thing like, again, adding up a ledger, but it
yeah,
actually forced you to use a different part of your brain. And I think then pushing the button and doing it, also then people thought the machine's done it, I don't have to worry about it. And then that means is then when things aren't adding up, when actually the data that you've got from your restaurant doesn't actually add up to what's being shown in the system, people were a little bit of a loss as to work out how to find it.
yeah,
I think the biggest change, I think, is that there's no doubt technology has changed hospitality. I think, yes, I'll say yes for the better.
yes.
We have to always be really mindful that it doesn't interfere with their primary purpose, which is interacting with the guest.
Yeah, and an issue we still face today. I've had a lot of conversations. We've got to get the balance between technology and obviously hospitality, which is the business we're in, right.
The other thing I think too, Brendan, is that what we have turned into, I think a lot of groups, and not just in hospitality, but we've gone from being customer service oriented probably to data oriented, where everybody wants to collect the data. And we've got that much data that we still don't use, but it's all about what data can I get out of this? Who can I sell that to? As opposed to necessarily using it for the betterment of my particular industry. So I think, you find a lot of organizations, they might be distribution organizations, then more they're marketing organizations that have a whole lot of data on people and their buying decisions that can be monetized. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's just, again, being mindful that that's sort of is what has happened.
Yes. Yeah, the power of loyalty programs. I think that's where the valuation is in hotels, I suppose, at the end of the day, right?
Well, when you sign up with any of the major groups, you know that you only get 30, 40, 50% of your clientele is going to be a member of the particular loyalty club. And that's great because it means a lower cost of acquisition and all of those things. But that data is still then being used for being monetized in other ways as well. And yeah, we won't go down the path of making sure that that's all secure.
No.
That because it's not just hotels, obviously, it's right across the board.
100%. I'm with Optus, so my data was compromised. There's also one of the insurance companies, my
Yeah.
data was compromised. So yeah, I mean, hotels have traditionally been targets because, hackers know that hotels have a lot of data on guests, often including credit card details. So,
If you think about some of the biggest changes in the industry, really, and as well as I do, that hoteliers are notoriously slow at adopting new technology, because we always would like to see it work elsewhere beforehand. But
yes,
I guess if you think about in general, what are the biggest changes we've seen over the industry? The biggest changes have probably come through things like you think about change of amenities. We no longer use obviously small bottles. We now use pump bottles.
yeah,
You look at the way that rooms have become more efficient. If I look at things like even brands like Little National that said, I've got a small room, how do I make it more efficient? Well, I'm going to put my bed in the window. Nobody would have thought about that. It's not so much a technology innovation as just a really creative design innovation. And I think, if anything, there's probably been more innovation that's impacted the industry that way. Because, okay, I know we've got check-in kiosks, and I know that the receptionist knows that I was here 3 weeks ago, and I knows that I prefer Diet Coke or whatever it is. But if I go back to when I started in the industry, well, the concierge knew that already.
yes.
So we've just transferred that knowledge from one place to another. But so I think the biggest change have come probably more in design.
Yeah, it's a good point. If we look ahead 10 years, Dean, what do you think the industry might look like?
I think the basic need for a customer to feel wanted, appreciated, recognised is never going to go away. There's no doubt that the modern traveller certainly wants to be connected. Coming back to our technology, and yes, it's really important to have that. A lot of clients, yes, do want to skip the desk, and so having the ability to check in on your phone and go straight to the room will be important. But there is still going to be that everlasting need for human touch somewhere along the line, because inevitably technology will break down and you need to have some type of backup for that. So that means that I think from that perspective, I think the degree of customer service training required won't go down. I think we're just going to need continually to upskill our team. The technology, probably in the future we'll have virtual check-ins. That's something that I thought about at one time. Having staff that might be based in another state or in another country, and you've just got TV screens that check you in, and they can be rotated amongst any number of hotels according to their demand. I think that's probably something that could happen. That could be via hologram as well into the future. I would consider that quite easy. I'm not sure about self-made beds. That probably won't come. You remember there have been, there's self-cleaning bathrooms,
Yes.
things like that. Obviously, there's improvements in vacuum cleaners or improvements in sheet technology. I'd like to see if that we could get rid of having to do linen and have perhaps highly eco-friendly. You sometimes go into a hospital and you'll have paper sheets, on the beds. You think, well, is that something could be introduced into hotels as well? That again saved on all of the washing. Now, there no doubt will be other eco implications of that. And I think then the other thing is that there's no doubt that from a climate change perspective, more and more hotels are being forced into considering their carbon imprint.
Yeah.
And I think to get hotels into having a zero carbon footprint is crucial. And I think that the hotels that adopt that the earliest will do well. But I think that's probably going to be the next big thing, I guess, in hotels, that we really have to say we can't keep using the same materials that we're using. We can't keep throwing out the amount of, whether it be food or other things that we manufacture, other plastic items, whatever, as we have been doing. So I think that's probably that'll be where the revolution occurs. in hotels.
Yes, and well, it's happening here. The EPA have some grants available at the moment. So industries such as the hospitality industry, food courts, and all that sort of stuff, that's the government here is pushing to introduce something by July next year, which will mean less waste to landfill, basically food
Yep.
waste. So there's a real big push from the EPA in that respect at the moment. Obviously, not only is it good for the environment, but it really helps from a bottom line point of view. I don't know if we're doing much in hotels, but I was talking to somebody in hospitals the other day, and I found it quite interesting. They introduced room service to the hospital. And I thought, well, that's got to increase costs because people can, eat what they want when they want. And the bottom line was that they saved the program was a $4 million program. The return on investment was 1 year, and they're saving $2.5 million a year.
Wow.
Because they found that traditionally they were delivering 6 meals, including a breakfast, lunch, dinner, morning tea, afternoon tea, and a supper. A lot of it was being returned. So they reduced food waste by 30%. They went from 6 meals a day to 2.8 meals a day. From a staffing point of view as well, even though they actually implemented a call center so guests would actually
Yeah.
place their order, and that was monitored against patient data. So if you're on a particularly strict diet, they would make sure
Yeah.
that you didn't order something that you weren't allowed to. So they implemented a whole new call center operating from 6 in the morning till 8:30 at night. Yet they were still able to reduce headcount and save $2.5 million, but at the same time improve guest satisfaction or patient satisfaction. The scores went up immensely on the food.
Yeah.
So I think there's a learning there from a hotel point of view. If we can get that food waste down, I know it's still a problem. Talking to some engineer colleagues of mine, that what they put out, what the kitchen throws away and is then gets carted away and paid for based on weight, is just crazy at the moment. Dean, as we get ready to wrap up, the last question I always like to ask is, what advice would you give to somebody who's looking at a career in hospitality?
I was going to give you a really flippant answer, but I won't. I'll give a more serious and considered response. I used to, when I used to, both when I had taught and also when we used to do staff induction days and things like that. And I would always say, don't go into the industry unless you love dealing with people. It's jokingly, I used to say, if you don't like dealing with people, go and become an accountant or something like that. Because the fact is that in hospitality, unless you can be on your game every single moment, you probably shouldn't be there, because at the end of the day, you're looking after people who want to be looked after, and they might be having a bad day, and you've got to be able to turn that around. So first of all, it would be, don't go into the industry unless you really are a people person. Now, having said that, of course, we have accountants, of course we have other people, but the hospitality mindset is one that I think is really unique in terms of its ability to deliver great service. It's the ability to laterally think. It's the ability to roll up your sleeves and get going. Many years ago, I was involved in a project that involved a casino and a hotel. And I was involved in delivering all of the hotel side of things. And we had a bit of a lull before the resort opened. And so we said, let's send all of our staff around the place and they'll do a tidy up. Let's do a tidy up. And what was interesting was that all of the hotel staff rolled the sleeves up and said, yep, those just went out and did it. The other staff sort of sat and said, well, I'm not sure what we need to do yet. Now, I'm not having a go at casino staff when I say that, but it's just that they were in a very regimented environment normally, where they can only make certain decisions based on approvals given. In hospitality, there's a lot more initiative needed, I guess, is what you'd say. And so I think it's sort of a unique skill of hospitality people, that they actually can take initiative, they can go out and actually get things done.
I like that. It's a good point. One of my first mentors said to me that initiative is key. Just, yeah, I like that.
And I think the other thing is that it's an old saying. It used to be, said, well, obviously just work hard and people will notice you. It's true up to a point, but I think the other thing is that you do need to work hard. But if you're not noticed, then you need to go and talk to somebody about why that isn't happening. And I guess, and take responsibility still for your own growth and for your own development.
Yep. No, that's true as well. Dean, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Brendon. It's been tremendous. Now, I must say I was disappointed you didn't ask me one of the questions on your
Which one?
on your list, which was, what would people not know about me?
So, Dean, what would be something that not many people would know about you?
That for 13 years I've been learning kendo,
Kendo.
which is a Japanese martial art, it's sword fighting martial art. that I took up with my son many years ago. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to do it the last couple of years because of injury, but I'm hoping to get back into it in the new year. But it was just a great, completely different sport to anything else that you might normally do. Obviously requires a great deal of self-discipline and ability to withstand blows to the head. So it's
Is it the one where they practice with the long
bamboo swords.
bamboo swords? Yeah.
And you have a face mask and you have, protection here and protection here. And yeah. So anyway, I just thought that's something that I don't meet many other kendo practitioners. So it's a great sport if anybody ever thought about taking it up.
And what's the benefit? Is it the discipline, the tranquility? What do you find beneficial?
I think it's all of those things. I think with any martial art that you do, a lot of it is to do with discipline, self-discipline. It's to do with following direction and being able to learn from somebody else, recognizing that you don't know everything. In kendo, it's often said, by the time you get to showdown, which is they don't have belts, but the equivalent of a black belt is what's called showdown. And what's recognized is it's only then that you really start to learn. You would think, oh, that's great, I've reached, that, but it's actually then that you really start to learn the nuances of it. And it's possibly similar to even working in the industry when you've worked for a number of years as well, that you've got to be in it for a few years till you start really picking up on all the nuances. And you've got to be prepared to learn that and recognize that you don't know everything. So I think with kendo, it's a really good one from that perspective. And it really teaches you a lot of, I said, it's about reading the other person, about reading the nuances, their movements, and again, being prepared for self-examination.
Interesting. I like that. That is something. I'm sorry I missed that question because a lot of people actually are like, oh, I'm pretty boring. There's nothing unique about me. Dean, once again, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Brendon. Catch up soon.
Thank you.